So I want you to imagine you are a lonely university student.
Okay.
You're in a totally new city. The weather is just starting to turn cold, and you are completely disconnected from your old friends, your family.
Basically, your entire usual support system.
Right, exactly. All of it is just gone. And you're walking around carrying this heavy backpack, but you're also feeling this invisible, crushing weight of the world on your shoulders.
Yeah, that sudden lack of structure can be totally overwhelming.
It really is. Like maybe you just went through a brutal breakup or you're just paralyzed by the anxiety of trying to figure out who you're supposed to be now. So you are sitting on this damn bench in the middle of a massive, bustling campus, staring blankly at your phone, and you're desperately hoping someone, literally anyone, will text you.
I think we've all been on that bench in one way or another.
Oh, 100%. So you're sitting there, and then two warm, smiling strangers approach you, and they don't look dangerous. They look just like you.
Right, they fit right in.
Yeah, they sit down, they start talking to you, and they don't seem like strangers for very long. I mean, they're incredibly attentive. They're making deep eye contact. They seem to understand you perfectly, almost like they're finishing your sentences for you.
Which feels amazing when you're that lonely.
Exactly. It feels like a relief.
Yeah.
And then they offer you an invitation. And it's not to anything weird or intimidating. It's just a community, a shared meal, a group of young people who are, trying to make the world a better place. They're basically offering you a sense of purpose.
And community.
Yeah. And in that moment, sitting on that cold bench, you just feel this profound, almost physical sense of relief. So the central question we're exploring in this deep dive is this. At what exact moment does that normal conversation become recruitment?
It's a really terrifyingly subtle pivot. And honestly, it gets right to the heart of the most persistent, probably the most dangerous myth we have about this entire topic.
Which is
The myth that someone joins a cult on purpose. Absolutely nobody, wakes up one morning and decides to join a high-control group voluntarily with the goal of losing their identity or, handing over their life savings.
right.
That is just a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology. People join these groups because they are actively searching for meaning.
They're looking for an anchor.
Exactly. They're searching for certainty, for a sense of belonging, or for a purpose greater than themselves. Cults, they don't use magic, they don't have supernatural powers, and they absolutely do not exclusively target people who are somehow gullible or stupid or weak-minded.
Which is what everyone always assumes, right? Like, oh, I'd never fall for that.
Right, because we want to distance ourselves from it.
Yeah.
But what they actually use is highly predictable, systematic psychological influence. They literally weaponize the very things that make us human.
Which completely flips the script on how we usually talk about this.
Yeah.
The cultural assumption is always that you have to be lacking intelligence to get pulled in.
But it's actually the opposite in many cases.
Yeah, and looking through the sources we've gathered for this deep dive, especially the incredibly detailed research from psychiatrist Dr. Robert J. Lifton on thought reform, and the behavioral frameworks from mental health professional Stephen Hassan, it becomes so clear that this isn't an accident. It is an architectural process. It's a literal blueprint.
It really is.
And the first thing that blueprint requires is raw material. Hassan talks a lot about vulnerability in his work. So what makes our student on the bench the perfect raw material in that specific moment?
Well, recruitment into any high-control group fundamentally requires bypassing a person's critical thinking. You need them to consent to a process that they don't actually fully understand yet.
Because if they understood it, they'd run away.
Precisely. So to get that initial consent, recruiters actively look for specific, identifiable vulnerabilities. And Hassan divides these into two main categories: situational and individual.
Okay, let's break those down. The student on the bench, they would be situational.
Textbook situational vulnerability. They are in a period of severe transition. Their normal baseline of reality is completely disrupted.
Because they've moved out of their childhood home, they don't have their usual friends to bounce ideas off of. They're unmoored.
Right. When you are in a major life transition like that, your brain is under an immense cognitive load. Whether you're moving to a new city or experiencing a severe economic disruption like losing a job or going through a nasty divorce or grieving the death of a loved one.
Your system is just flooded.
Flooded with stress hormones.
Yeah.
During these periods, your cortisol levels are just spiking. Your nervous system is basically locked in a state of high alert. So your normal reality is suspended, and you are biologically driven to find a new anchor, a new source of safety to calm your nervous system down.
Wow. And we actually saw this on a massive global scale recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. It was a perfect storm for situational vulnerability.
Because of the extreme isolation.
Hmm.
We had this total lack of physical touch. And just the sheer amount of time we were forced to spend entirely online doom scrolling all day.
Society was collectively unmoored,
Mm.
which created this massive population-wide spike in situational vulnerability. People were desperate for answers and connection.
So the recruiters on campus, they aren't necessarily scanning the quad for someone with a low IQ. They're looking for someone whose psychological immune system is temporarily compromised.
That's a really great way to put it.
It's like a virus, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't really matter how physically strong you generally are. If your immune system is currently exhausted fighting off a major stressor, a virus can slip right in.
Yeah.
And the terrifying part of this specific psychological virus is that it completely disguises itself as the cure.
Let's actually push that virus metaphor a little bit further because mechanically, it's incredibly accurate to what Hassan and Lifton described.
Really? How so?
Well, think about how a retrovirus like HIV, for example, actually works in the human body. It doesn't just attack a cell and destroy it. It literally inserts its own RNA into the host cell's DNA.
It rewrites the code.
Exactly. The host cell then unknowingly reads that viral code as if it were its own natural programming, and it begins manufacturing more of the virus. This is exactly what systematic social influence does to a person's identity.
Oh, man. That is chilling.
The group essentially inserts its ideology into the vulnerable recruit's internal monologue. So the recruit thinks they are making their own decisions, thinking their own organic thoughts, but their psychological DNA has literally been rewritten to reproduce the group's agenda.
That is so sinister.
It is, and on top of those situational stressors we talked about, Hassan notes there are individual vulnerabilities that make that rewriting process even easier.
Like what? Like a history of trauma?
Yes, definitely. Unresolved trauma can severely impact how a person processes trust and safety. Their threat detection systems might be miscalibrated, making them miss huge red flags. Hassan also points to learning or communication disorders, or individuals on the autism spectrum who might struggle to read subtle social cues. They can be exploited by highly manipulative individuals who have basically learned how to mimic genuine, safe connection.
So they're targeting people who might not realize they're being played.
Right, but, and this is crucial, he also mentions traits that we normally view as highly positive, things you'd put on a resume,
Like what?
like having a strong capacity for vivid imagination or high hypnotizability.
Wait, high hypnotizability. What does that actually mean in a day-to-day context? Because when I hear that, it just sounds like swinging a pocket watch in front of someone's face.
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with pocket watches or stage shows. High hypnotizability simply refers to a person's natural ability to enter deeply focused, altered states of consciousness.
Okay, so like zoning out.
More like deep immersion. If you are the kind of person who gets totally, utterly lost in a really good novel, to the point where you literally don't hear someone calling your name from across the room. Or if you can deeply immerse yourself in a piece of music or a creative project for hours.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Right. That requires a very high capacity for concentration and dissociation from your immediate surroundings. And it's a wonderful trait. It's great for an artist or a scientist or a writer.
But I'm guessing there's a downside.
A big one. If you lack critical media literacy, or if you don't have a grounded, solid support network, that ability to deeply suspend your disbelief can make you so much more susceptible to a highly structured, immersive social environment.
Wow. Okay, so our student on the bench has the situational vulnerability of being in a new, lonely environment. And maybe they are also incredibly empathetic and imaginative, which is an individual vulnerability.
A perfect target.
Right. But there's another layer to this that Dr. Robert J. Lifton talks about in our sources. He introduces this term, historical dislocation, to explain why there is such a massive market for these groups in the first place.
Yes, this is a brilliant concept.
But honestly, when I first read it, it sounded a bit like an academic excuse. I mean, aren't people today more connected than ever before in human history? Why would having an iPhone and 1,000 followers make someone want to run off and join a high-control commune?
Well, we are technologically connected, absolutely. But Lifton is talking about the loss of structural, symbolic connection.
What does that mean exactly?
If you look back at human history, For thousands and thousands of years, societies had very clear community-wide organizing structures. We had initiation rites. There were structured, culturally agreed upon ways to transition from childhood to adulthood.
Right. Everybody knew the rules.
Exactly. There were deeply embedded belief systems concerning authority, marriage, the changing of the seasons, how to handle death. You knew your exact place in the cosmos because the community provided the map for you.
Okay, I see.
But in contemporary advanced industrial, and especially now in digital societies, those maps have just been shredded.
Yeah, they really have. I mean, the transition to early adult life isn't guided by the village elders anymore. You basically just turn 18, you are handed a mountain of student debt, you're told to figure out a career in an economy that seems to change completely every 6 months.
And you are expected to just inherently know how to navigate this incredibly fragmented, chaotic world.
With no map whatsoever.
None. And that causes deep, chronic existential anxiety. That is what Lifton means by historical dislocation. The old symbols don't work anymore, and we haven't successfully built new ones to replace them yet.
It's just a void.
Exactly. And cults, as Lifton observes, step right into that void. They function as a substitute initiation rite. They offer a prepackaged, beautifully wrapped map to life. And they do this by presenting an ideology that is simultaneously radical and reactionary.
Wait, how can an ideology be both radical and reactionary at the same time? Those are literal opposites.
They are, but they combine them perfectly. They are radical because they ask rude, piercing, entirely valid questions about the status quo.
Okay, so the recruiters on the bench, what are they asking?
They might ask the student, don't you feel like the corporate rat race is literally destroying the planet? Don't you feel like modern relationships are incredibly shallow? Isn't the political system entirely broken and corrupt?
And the student's thinking, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Finally, someone gets it.
Right. They validate the young person's sense that the larger culture is deeply confused and hypocritical. That hooks the student. It feels radical and true. But the solution the group offers is profoundly reactionary.
Also,
Because they don't offer a path forward through the messiness and compromise of modern democracy. They offer a return to pre-modern structures of absolute, unquestionable authority.
oh, I see.
They reject the painful historical process of individual autonomy. They basically say, you don't have to figure it out alone anymore. Just give us your autonomy and we will give you absolute certainty.
We have all the answers. Just stop trying to think for yourself.
Exactly.
So they successfully diagnose a real societal illness, this historical dislocation. But the medicine they prescribe is total submission.
Which brings us to how they actually build that foundational trust.
Right, because Lifton talks about the protean style versus the restricted style. And the protean style, which is named after the Greek sea god Proteus, who could constantly change his shape, that's basically just modern life, right? The freedom to be whoever you want.
Yes. The protean style is characterized by continuous psychological experimentation. It's the capacity to hold contradictory ideas, to change your beliefs, your friends, your career path, your entire aesthetic with relative ease.
Which sounds great on paper.
It is the ultimate freedom of the modern age.
But the paradox is that this ultimate freedom is totally exhausting. I mean, constantly having to invent and reinvent yourself, curating your personal brand online, swiping through endless dating profiles, having infinite career choices but absolutely zero financial security. The cognitive fatigue of all that endless experimentation is staggering.
It is deeply exhausting, and cults offer the exact opposite. A restricted style. They offer a flight from the anxiety of the Probian world. They provide a strictly ordered haven where the rules are crystal clear, the hierarchy is absolute, and the experimentation finally stops.
You can just breathe.
Exactly. You no longer have to invent yourself. Your identity is provided for you by the group.
Okay, but let me push back on this mechanically for a second. Because if I am a free-thinking university student, even if I am exhausted by modern life and historical dislocation, if some guy comes up to me and says, hey, come live in my strictly ordered haven where you have zero autonomy and must obey a guru, all my internal alarms are going to ring.
Of course they would.
I'm going to run in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So how do they actually get the student to accept this restricted style without immediately triggering their natural threat response?
That is the most insidious part of the entire blueprint. The trap never, ever looks like a trap. It looks like a loving embrace. Lifton answers your question with a concept he calls mystical manipulation, or sometimes it's called planned spontaneity. The leadership basically engineers a systematic process of psychological espionage, but to the target it appears entirely spontaneous and magical.
How does that actually play out in real life? Like, walk me through how they engineer spontaneity.
Okay, let's go back to our student. They agree to go to that shared meal they were invited to. They are sitting in a cozy living room, surrounded by smiling, attentive people.
That's nice.
It is nice.
Good.
A senior member of the group casually strikes up a conversation. They get the student to open up about a deep personal insecurity, maybe a fear of failure, or some lingering guilt about a messy family dynamic.
So the student is being vulnerable.
Right, and the student thinks they are just having a private, intimate moment with a trusted new friend. What they don't know is that the senior member immediately reports that entire conversation up the chain of command.
No.
Yes. So the next evening, the leader of the group gives a public talk, and miraculously, the entire sermon perfectly addresses that exact insecurity. And the leader makes intense, knowing eye contact with the student right as they deliver the emotional payload.
Oh, wow. So to the student, it literally feels like the leader is reading their mind.
It feels like divine intervention.
Yeah, it feels like destiny.
Exactly. You feel that every coincidence is fate. If you run into group members randomly on campus the next day, you don't realize they were actively tracking your class schedule. You think the universe is giving you a sign that you belong with them.
Because you want to believe it.
Right. The environment is heavily, meticulously managed behind the scenes. And on top of that, the group might also use physiological techniques to lower your natural defenses.
Like what?
Like subtly shifting you to a high-carb, low-protein diet, or excessive chanting, or fasting, or just keeping you up late talking about deep philosophy so you were constantly sleep-deprived.
Which messes with your ability to think clearly.
Exactly. It heightens your emotional suggestibility. So when these manufactured miracles happen, your brain literally doesn't have the metabolic energy to critically evaluate them. You just feel this overwhelming sense of awe and serendipity. Lifton calls this creating the psychology of the pawn.
That is terrifying because it perfectly weaponizes our natural human desire for serendipity.
Yeah.
Like, we all want to feel like we are part of a larger magical story.
And we crave it.
And if you genuinely believe the group has a direct line to destiny, you start to trust them implicitly. And this manipulation, it extends to how the group interacts with the outside world too, right? Because if they are manipulating the student, they're definitely manipulating everyone else. Lifton mentions this term, heavenly deception.
Yes. Heavenly deception is a term closely associated with the Unification Church historically, but the underlying mechanism exists in almost all high-control groups.
How does it work?
Once the group establishes that they are the sole arbiters of absolute truth, which they do through that mystical manipulation, a very dangerous logical leap occurs. If the group is pure and good, and they're the only ones who can save the world, then the outside world is inherently impure and evil. Therefore, the normal rules of morality do not apply when dealing with outsiders.
Because they're the enemy.
Right. Deceiving outsiders is not a sin. It is actually a moral duty. It is completely justified if it serves the divine cause of the group.
So if a lower-level member is out on the street collecting money and a pedestrian asks, "Hey, is this for a cult?" they are specifically instructed to lie and say it's for a generic youth charity or something.
Precisely. And to the new recruit, participating in this deception doesn't feel like a red flag at all.
Why not? Lying is usually a red flag.
Because of the mystical manipulation. It actually reinforces their feeling of being part of a special chosen elite. They hold a sacred truth that the rest of the dark, ignorant world just isn't ready for yet. They're protecting the truth.
Wow. This brings us to a really crucial distinction in Stephen Hassan's work that I want to highlight. Because I know someone listening to this right now might say, well, my boss manipulated me into working the weekend, or advertisers manipulate me to buying shoes I don't need. We are all influenced all the time.
It's a common comparison.
So what is the mechanical difference between normal, everyday influence and what a cult does?
It's a vital question. Hassan draws a very sharp boundary between due influence and undue influence. Due influence is basically how normal society operates. It allows for informed consent.
Okay, give me an example.
When you watch a car commercial on TV, you know it's a commercial. You know the company's agenda is to sell you a car. Your critical thinking is fully engaged. You might buy the car, you might not. But due influence respects your free will. And most importantly, it leaves your inner voice intact. You can walk away from the dealership at any time without fear of spiritual ruin.
Undue influence, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is fundamentally deceptive from the very first moment on the bench.
Yes, Undue influence creates the illusion of choice while actually suppressing your inner voice. It isolates you. Every single interaction in those early days, the intense eye contact, the overwhelming affection, which is known as love bombing.
Love bombing, yeah, where they just shower you with praise.
Exactly. It makes it feel like you are making a totally free choice to spend more time with these amazing people, but you are being given the illusion of informed choice, while the critical information you actually need to make a choice, like the group's true history, the leader's actual demands, the hidden agendas, all of that is being systematically withheld or distorted.
It's like signing a contract where the fine print is invisible.
Exactly. The invisible walls are closing in around you, but they are painted to look like a beautiful horizon.
So our student has been love bombed. They've experienced what feels like destiny-laden connections through mystical manipulation. They genuinely believe they are exercising their free will to find a cure for their historical dislocation. They completely trust the group. The psychological door is now unlocked.
Wide open.
What happens next? Because this is where the actual architecture of thought reform is built, isn't it?
This is where the trap slams shut. Once foundational trust is established and the target is sufficiently isolated from objective sources of information, the heavy machinery of behavior modification begins.
And Lifton outlines 8 specific criteria for this, right?
He does. He calls it ideological totalism. And it is so vital to understand that this is not a mystical or magical process. It is a mechanical, step-by-step dismantling of a human identity.
Let's really break these down, because reading Lifton's framework, literally felt like reading the architectural blueprint for a psychological prison. He starts with milieu control.
Milieu control is the absolute bedrock of the entire process. It is the control of all communication within a given environment. And mechanically, this happens in 2 distinct stages.
What's the first stage?
First is physical isolation. The group might mandate moving into a communal house or relocating to a rural compound. They might casually confiscate your car keys or hold onto your passport for safekeeping.
Cutting off the physical exits.
Exactly. But the second, much more insidious form of milieu control is environmental control through relentless scheduling.
Right, keeping people so unbelievably busy they physically cannot think.
Exactly. The sources detail these intense, unending sequences of events. Seminars, lectures, encounter groups, mandatory group meals, fundraising drives. If you were in a seminar for 12 hours a day and then doing mandatory group bonding for another 4 hours, you are experiencing severe sleep deprivation.
Which destroys you physically.
And neurologically. From a neurological standpoint, chronic lack of sleep degrades the function of your prefrontal cortex.
That's the logic center, right?
Right. It's the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, complex planning, and evaluating long-term consequences. As the prefrontal cortex goes offline due to exhaustion, your amygdala, which is the emotional survival center of the brain, essentially takes over.
So you stop thinking and just start reacting.
You become highly reactive, fearful, and incredibly suggestible to whatever the group tells you.
So the schedule isn't just about learning the group's ideology. It's a literal physiological attack on the brain's ability to resist.
Yes. And the ultimate goal of milieu control is to manage the individual's inner communication. Think about it. When you control what a person reads, who they speak to, and how much they sleep, you eventually cut off the internal dialogue that allows them to evaluate their own reality.
Because they just don't have the space for it anymore.
Individual autonomy becomes a direct threat to the group. Eventually, you literally can't hear yourself think. The only voice left in your head becomes the group's voice.
And once they successfully control the physical environment and the schedule, they have to control the emotions. Which brings us to Lifton's next 2 points, which seem to operate in this really devastating tandem: the demand for purity and the cult of confession.
These are the primary levers of emotional control. The demand for purity establishes a radical, absolute binary separation of good and evil.
Black and white.
Completely. The group and its ideology are perfectly pure. Everything else, the outside world, your past life, your natural doubts, your normal human desires, your family, all of it is impure and tainted.
But biologically, psychologically, no human being can ever be 100% pure by those extreme standards. We all have doubts, we get tired, we get angry, we get selfish sometimes.
And that is exactly the point. The standard is intentionally impossible to meet. Because you can never meet the standard of purity, you are placed in a constant, agonizing state of failure.
You're always falling short.
You are perpetually guilty. And this is where the cult of confession comes in. You are required to constantly confess these perceived impurities, often in highly aggressive public group settings.
Let's really look at the psychology of this, because Lifton uses quotes from the philosopher Albert Camus to explain how confession is weaponized, and it really struck me.
It's a fascinating connection.
Right, because in a normal therapeutic setting, like if you go to a therapist, confession is supposed to bring relief. You get it off your chest. But Camus says, authors of confessions write especially to avoid confession, to tell nothing of what they know. How does that apply to the student sitting in the hot seat surrounded by the group?
It's a brilliant insight into survival psychology. When a young recruit is put in a circle and heavily pressured to confess the sins of their life, they quickly realize that genuine, authentic vulnerability is punished.
What do you mean?
If they confess their true feelings, like if they say, I secretly think the leader is a hypocrite and I really miss my mom and want to go home, they will be verbally attacked or shamed or shunned by the group.
So they can't tell the truth.
No. So they quickly learn to perform the exact confession the group wants to hear. They confess to being selfish or materialistic or lost before they found the group. They confess these approved, safe sins to avoid truly confessing the thoughts that would mark them as a threat.
Oh, wow. They learn to lie to survive the pressure.
Exactly. It's a performance of penitence.
But the performance actually changes them over time, doesn't it? Because Camus also says, I practice the profession of penitence to be able to end up as a judge. And the more I accuse myself, the more I have a right to judge you.
This is where the emotional abuse becomes a perfectly closed loop. Mechanically, repetitious public confession breeds a deeply toxic arrogance that is masked as humility.
How does tearing yourself down make you arrogant?
Because by violently criticizing yourself in front of the group, by tearing yourself down and crying over your sins, you are demonstrating your absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the ideology of purity. You are proving you are part of the elite.
Right.
And by proving your loyalty through self-flagellation, you earn the right to turn around and ruthlessly judge the person sitting next to you for their impurities.
It turns the victims into the wardens of their own prison.
Precisely. They police each other through guilt and shame, doing the leadership's job for them. It's incredibly efficient.
It's horrifying. So we have physical exhaustion, neurological degradation from sleep deprivation, and this constant swirling storm of manufactured guilt and shame. But how do they actually alter the mechanics of how a person processes information? Because that brings us to what might be the most fascinating mechanism on Lifton's list: loading the language.
Language is the operating system of human thought. It is literally how we organize reality. If you can restrict a person's vocabulary, you can restrict the parameters of what is possible for them to think.
Wow.
Loading the language is the systematic reduction of complex, nuanced human problems into simplified, thought-terminating cliches. It relies on a highly literal, slogan-heavy vocabulary.
I really want to unpack the mechanics of a thought-terminating cliche, because it's such a powerful concept. Let's say our student sees the charismatic leader doing something deeply unethical, like stealing money from the commune or being emotionally abusive to a member. In the real world, the student would use complex language to explore that. They'd think, I am troubled by this behavior. It contradicts our stated values. Maybe this person isn't who they say they are. That creates cognitive dissonance.
Yes, cognitive dissonance is that severe psychological discomfort that occurs when your brain tries to hold two entirely contradictory beliefs at the exact same time.
Like the leader is perfectly divine versus the leader just did something terrible.
Right. Your brain hates that discomfort. It feels like physical pain, and your brain will do almost anything to resolve it quickly. In a totalistic environment, the loaded language provides the escape hatch.
How?
The group will have drilled a thought-terminating cliche into the student's head long before this moment. Something like Satan's static, or bourgeois sentimentalism, or spiritual warfare.
So the moment the student feels that painful dissonance about the stolen money, the training kicks in. They label the doubt immediately. Oh, I'm not having a legitimate ethical concern. I'm just experiencing Satan's static.
And boom, the thought literally stopped.
It just shuts down.
Mechanically, the cliché short-circuits the neural pathways required for critical analysis. It acts as a pressure release valve for the cognitive dissonance. The student feels immediate psychological relief because the conflict is resolved.
The leader is still divine, and the doubt was just an external attack.
Exactly. The jargon exerts enormous force, embodying the group's truth as an absolute totality. There's no room for nuance.
And this naturally leads to Lifton's principle of doctrine over person. When what the dogma says completely contradicts what the person is experiencing with their own two eyes, the dogma always wins.
Absolutely. The deeply internalized message is that the doctrine is flawless. Therefore, any contradiction is framed entirely as a personal moral failure or an inherent evil within the member.
Your reality is always wrong. The doctrine is always right.
Yes. Stephen Hassan's BITE model, which stands for Behavior, Information, Thought, and Emotional Control, summarizes this entire phase perfectly. Through rewards and punishments, thought-stopping techniques, and absolute environmental control, the authentic identity is broken down and completely replaced.
And here is the most chilling paradox of this entire process. If you were to walk into that compound and ask our student, who is now sleep-deprived, malnourished, racked with induced guilt, and stripped of their ability to even process critical language, if you ask them how they are doing, they wouldn't say they're being tortured.
Not at all.
Because of the loaded language and the mystical manipulation, they are entirely, genuinely convinced they are achieving enlightenment or saving the world.
That is the ultimate tragedy of undue influence. Due to these mechanisms, most members genuinely believe they are becoming more free, while their autonomy is actually shrinking to zero.
Insert 2-3 second silence here. How does someone not see it?
It's hard to fathom from the outside.
That silence just lets the horror of that reality hang there. I mean, we've mapped out the mechanics of the trap. We see all the levers being pulled. But the burning question I have, and I know anyone listening has, is how could someone not realize they are being manipulated this completely? Why do we all walk around with this arrogant assumption that we would be perfectly immune to this?
We assume we are immune because we have fundamentally flawed expectations of what mind control actually looks like. We are looking for the wrong warning signs.
What do you mean?
To understand the mechanics of our own blindness, we have to look at a brilliant 1992 study by psychologist Jeffrey E. Pfeiffer on the psychological framing of cults.
This study is incredible because it exposes how our own cognitive biases literally do the recruiter's work for them. Break down how Pfeiffer set up this experiment.
Pfeiffer wanted to know if people evaluate indoctrination based on the objective psychological mechanisms being used, or if they just evaluate the label attached to the group.
Like judging a book by its cover.
Exactly. He wanted to test our schematic representations, our pre-existing stereotypes. So he had subjects read a highly detailed written description of a young man joining a group and going through an intensive training process.
What specifically was in the description?
The text described the exact psychological mechanisms we've just spent the last half hour unpacking. It described the young man being isolated from his family. It detailed intense peer pressure, strict behavioral protocols, sleep deprivation, changes in diet, repetitive chanting or lecturing, and severe pressure to conform to a radically new belief system.
The exact blueprint.
Yes. The genius of the study design was that the description of these techniques was identical for every single subject, word for word, the exact same text.
Okay.
However, Pfeiffer divided the subjects into 3 groups. Depending on which group you were in, you were given a different label for the organization the young man was joining.
Ah, here we go.
Group 1 was told he was joining the Unification Church, often referred to pejoratively in the media as the Moonies.
A well-known cult.
Right. Group 2 was told he was joining the United States Marines, and Group 3 was told he was joining a Catholic seminary to become a priest.
So they are reading the identical text about isolation, sleep deprivation, and thought reform, but filtering it through 3 completely different cultural lenses. What happened?
The results prove that our biases completely override our objective observation. People evaluated the exact same psychological techniques completely differently based solely on the group label.
I mean, I can guess, but tell me the breakdown.
When subjects thought the group was the Moonies, they rated the techniques as highly coercive, dangerous, and a form of brainwashing. They evaluated the young man who joined as psychologically weak, gullible, or mentally unstable.
But when they read the identical text believing it was the Marines or the Catholic Church,
they rated those exact same techniques as necessary, discipline-building, or spiritually rigorous. They viewed the young man favorably as someone dedicated and strong. They anchored their judgments entirely on the label on the door, not on the objective reality of what was happening inside the room.
think about what that means for us today. I mean, apply this to the listener right now. Think about the last time you read a profile of a wildly successful tech CEO, a guy who mandates that his employees work 80-hour weeks, sleep under their desks, cut off contact with their families during crunch time, and use bizarre corporate jargon that terminates critical thought about their labor rights.
Happens all the time.
Did your brain code that as Milieu control and loaded language?
Mm.
Or did your brain code it as hustle culture and disruptive innovation?
That is the exact mechanism Pfeiffer is exposing. Our cultural knowledge of cults is based on sensationalized media movies, true crime documentaries, folklore.
We expect it to look crazy.
Right. We have a schema that tells us cult brainwashing involves people in matching robes, chanting in a dungeon with a swinging pendulum led by a guy with wild eyes. Because we hold this false cinematic schema, we fail to recognize standard, systematic social influence when it happens right in front of us.
It's invisible to us.
If the recruiter is wearing a Patagonia vest, or sounds like a soothing wellness influencer on TikTok, or uses corporate synergy jargon, our cult alarm never goes off. It doesn't match the bizarre schema. We are vulnerable precisely because we think we know what to look for.
Our false schemas give us a false sense of security. And while we are feeling secure and intellectual superior, the systematic process of identity alteration just continues. Which brings me to a deeply disturbing question about that identity alteration.
Okay.
We've established how they change behavior,
Right.
but what actually happens to the person's original identity? Let's go back to our student. Is the old self deleted? Is it like wiping a hard drive and installing new software?
No, it is not deleted, and understanding that is the key to understanding the psychological agony of being in a cult. Lifton introduces the concept of doubling, and Stephen Hassan refers to it extensively as identity disturbance.
What does doubling mean?
Undue influence doesn't erase the old identity. Mechanically, it creates a new identity designed specifically to suppress and manage the old one. The two selves live side by side within the same brain.
So you literally have a fractured self.
Yes.
You have the student self, who loved their family, had ambitions to be a writer, enjoyed playing guitar, had a quirky sense of humor. And then you have the newly constructed cult self, who speaks exclusively in loaded language, feels intense, manufactured guilt, and obeys the leadership absolutely.
Exactly. The cult self is meticulously constructed through the indoctrination sessions, the milieu control, the public confessions. The cult self is constantly rewarded by the environment for conformity.
And the student self.
The original student self is punished, starved, and shamed whenever it services. So the cult self acts as a warden, keeping the original identity locked in the subconscious.
But it's not dead.
No, the original self is still there. It occasionally surfaces in dreams or during moments when the milieu control slips. Maybe they hear a song from their childhood or see a certain kind of car and they feel a flash of their old life.
And this mechanical fracturing of the identity explains something that always frustrates people on the outside. People always scream at the television when they watch documentaries, why don't they just walk out the door? The gate is open.
Yeah.
But they aren't just walking away from a physical building, are they?
No. They are facing a catastrophic psychological crisis.
Uh-huh.
Leaving requires abandoning the cult self. And you have to remember, for months or years or even decades, the cult self has been their sole survival mechanism.
It's kept them alive in that environment.
It has been their entire source of meaning, community, and safety. To walk away means killing the cult self, which feels like a literal psychological death.
And they don't even know if the original student self is still alive enough to take over.
Precisely. They are paralyzed by identity confusion. They are terrified of the outside world because the loaded language has framed it as purely evil and toxic, and they are facing the horrifying prospect of navigating that evil world with a fractured mind.
It's an impossible choice.
It is a massive sunk cost fallacy applied to the human soul. They have sacrificed their family, their money, and their original personality for this group. To leave is to admit that the sacrifice was for absolutely nothing.
Wow.
So, manipulated by fear, guilt, and cognitive dissonance, staying genuinely feels physically safer than the terrifying void of leaving.
The psychological prison is inescapable because the bars are literally made of the person's own hijacked identity.
Exactly.
But if leaving is a psychological death, what happens to those who stay? What happens when this blueprint is followed all the way to its logical, bitter end without any outside intervention?
This brings us to the final and unequivocally most dangerous characteristic of Lifton's framework of ideological totalism. It is the culmination of the entire blueprint. He calls it the dispensing of existence.
Dispensing of existence. It sounds like a really cold academic term for murder. What does it actually mean in the ideology of a high-control group?
It is the ultimate lethal conclusion of the demand for purity we talked about earlier. We discussed how the group draws a sharp binary line across humanity. On the inside are the chosen, the pure, the enlightened.
Right.
Because they possess the absolute truth, they possess the right to exist. On the outside is everyone else. the critics, the ex-members, the impure world. In the totalist ideology, those outsiders are not just wrong, they are wedded to evil, they are tainted, and therefore they literally lack the right to exist. Their existence is null and void.
So it evolves from we are right and you are wrong to we are valid and you are a disease.
Yes. For a member inside the group, this creates an atmosphere of absolute terror. Being cast out of the group doesn't just mean losing your friends, it means being pushed across that line into the realm of the non-existent. It induces a profound, paralyzing fear of extinction.
But Lifton makes it clear that this isn't always just a psychological metaphor used to control people, right? Sometimes the dispensing of existence steps out of the theoretical realm and becomes physical, bloody reality.
Yeah. Tragically, yes. Under malignant conditions, led by a malignant narcissist or a psychopath, the metaphorical dispensing of existence becomes agonizingly literal. Lifton points to massive historical examples, like state-sponsored totalism in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, where millions were dispensed with for racial or doctrinal impurities.
Right, on a macro level.
But in the specific context of cults, we have to look at the most devastating, high-stakes, real-world application of this blueprint, Jonestown.
The People's Temple, where over 900 people, including over 300 children, died in the jungle of Guyana in 1978. Culturally, Jonestown is usually dismissed as an inexplicable anomaly, just a bunch of crazy people drinking Kool-Aid. But based on everything we've discussed today, Jonestown wasn't an anomaly at all, was it?
No, Jonestown was the terminal mechanical stage of everything we have unpacked in this hour. Jim Jones was a highly charismatic, deeply malignant leader who intuitively understood and weaponized every single psychological mechanism on Lifton's list.
Every single one.
Yes. And he didn't start with cyanide. He started on the bench, just like our student. He started by appealing to people's desire for meaning. In the 1950s and 60s, the People's Temple offered racial integration, social justice, and a vibrant community during a time of intense historical dislocation and civil rights struggles in America.
He recruited vulnerable people looking to build a better world.
Exactly. But then he began applying the blueprint.
Let's trace that escalation because it maps perfectly to the mechanics.
Yeah.
How did he implement milieu control?
He started by controlling schedules in California, keeping members exhausted with endless meetings and labor. But ultimate milieu control was achieved when he moved the core of the congregation to an isolated agricultural project carved out of the jungle in South America.
Total physical isolation.
Complete. He confiscated their passports, he controlled all the radio communications, there were armed guards. Physical escape and outside communication were completely severed. The prefrontal cortex of the entire community was shut down through malnutrition, intense heat, and chronic sleep deprivation.
And once they were trapped in the jungle, he escalated the demand for purity and the cult of confession.
Violently. He instituted what were known as catharsis sessions, which were brutal, hours-long public confessions. Members were forced to confess their impurities, their doubts, their desires to go back to America.
Just like Camus said.
And just as Camus predicted, they learned to confess whatever would save them from physical beatings. The doubling was profound. Parents were coerced into policing and punishing their own children on behalf of the leader to prove their loyalty to the cult self.
He turned the victims into the wardens, and he loaded the language.
He relentlessly loaded the language. He framed the outside world, specifically the U.S. government and the media, as an absolute encroaching evil. He used thought-terminating cliches about fascists and capitalist pigs to shut down any critical thought about the horrific conditions in the camp.
And this culminated in the literal dispensing of existence.
Yes. When a U.S. congressman came to investigate and some members tried to leave with him, Jones realized his totalist control was cracking, so he implemented revolutionary suicide. He framed their mass death not as a defeat, but as the ultimate act of purity, a revolutionary rejection of an evil world.
Which is just, it's unspeakable.
It was a mass suicide murder that demonstrates the absolute, lethal endpoint of unchecked psychological manipulation.
It strips away any illusion we might have that thought reform is just an academic concept or something that happens to other people. It is a loaded weapon. Jonestown is the starkest reminder that these mechanisms can override the most fundamental biological drive we have, the drive to keep our own children alive.
And that is exactly why understanding this blueprint, understanding the how and the why, is so vital. Cults do not succeed because of the supernatural charisma of a leader, and they do not succeed because of the innate gullibility of a victim. They succeed because they weaponize the universal structural features of the human mind.
Let's summarize that core thesis, because it is the most important thing to take away from this deep dive. They don't use magic. They exploit our fundamental human need for meaning.
Right.
They exploit our anxiety in the face of historical dislocation, our desperate lack of modern rituals and clear paths. They prey on our situational vulnerabilities during periods of transition, when our psychological immune systems are compromised by stress and cognitive load.
They look for the cracks.
They use the illusion of serendipity and mystical manipulation to bypass our threat detection systems. And then once the door is open, they systematically isolate us. They control our environment to exhaust our brains. They manipulate our emotions with impossible standards of purity and weaponized confession.
They break you down.
They restrict our language to short-circuit our critical thinking. And they suppress our authentic identities to create a compliant, terrified second self.
Yes. They use systematic, algorithmic influence step by step to achieve total control. And as Pfeiffer's research on psychological framing shows, we remain hopelessly vulnerable to this process precisely because our biases have us looking for monsters in robes, rather than recognizing the subtle, methodical steps of behavior modification unfolding in plain sight.
Which brings me to a final thought for us to wrap up on. We've seen how these psychological levers, the physical isolation, the loaded language, the systematic behavior modification, the creation of a pure in-group versus an evil out-group, how all of this can completely override a person's identity when they are trapped in a closed physical community like a jungle compound or a high-control church or a radical political faction.
Right.
But I want to take a look at the digital world we all live in today.
Oh, a very relevant pivot, especially considering the epidemic of isolation and historical dislocation in the modern era.
Right. Think about our lonely university student again, sitting on that damp bench staring at their phone. But this time, the smiling strangers don't approach them in person. They don't have to. The student opens an app, and they find a community online.
It happens instantly.
A community that perfectly algorithmically validates their deepest anxieties. A community that uses thought-terminating cliches in their hashtags to shut down nuanced debate. A community that demands absolute ideological purity and engages in intense public, digitally amplified mutual criticism and cancellation of anyone who steps out of line.
The parallels are definitely there.
We know that cults use our basic human need for meaning and connection against us. So what happens when these exact same psychological levers are being pulled, not by a guy in aviator glasses in a jungle, but by the engagement algorithms that curate your social media feed every single day? Algorithms that are mathematically designed to isolate you into echo chambers, to feed you a continuous loop of outrage that separates the world into absolute good and absolute evil, to keep you infinitely scrolling through a highly restricted, heavily loaded digital environment. Are you absolutely sure your digital reality isn't its own form of milieu control?